Hello, and welcome to Roundtable Mindset, the podcast where we seek to understand and share different perspectives in order to grow and challenge our own. And we encourage you, our guests, to do the same.
Each week, we will pick a topic to discuss, sharing our own unique thoughts and insights. There will be times when we won't agree, and let's be real, that'll probably be most of the time, and that's okay. We feel it's important to understand that we can live in this polarized world and still respect one another and even be friends.
Well, hello again, my friend.
Hello.
We're back for another episode of Roundtable Mindset. I'm excited.
Which can I tell you, it's been for the listeners, although it might have just been minutes ago since you listened to our last episode. It's been a couple weeks because life has gotten in the way, hasn't it, Jamie?
Yes. Well, and thankfully, since we're prepping for our big launch that happened 3 episodes ago, we had the space to just take a minute and do the family thing, and come back together. So it's exciting. I'm ready to go. So
yes, I've missed our chatting and our conversation. So it'll be good to get back into it.
Yeah. So this week I had this situation come up where really took me some time to think about what had happened, but there was a situation, and I found myself really frustrated with, I didn't even know why I was frustrated, to be honest. Like, I'm sitting there and it was like this yucky amount of feelings that was happening for me. And, so I decided to step away from the situation. I decided to step away and just take some space because I knew nothing positive was going to come from staying in that space. Right. So,
oh, I've had that before.
Who hasn't, right? I mean,
right.
I'm not going to say it's like a weekly thing, but maybe it's a weekly thing. But it was interesting because I found myself in a space where, as the stuff was unfolding and the things were happening, I was feeling like I should have done something different. I should have been, the things were happening that I should have been doing or something like that. Now, no one had asked me to do these things. No one had indicated that I should have done these things, but I had this feeling that, this is something I should have been doing. So I took the rest of the afternoon away. I went, got my hair did, enjoyed a nice conversation with my hairstylist, came home, had dinner.
AKA venting session.
No. I came home and, got to spend some time with the kid. Really had to take some time and think about what had happened, to get some perspective and to get some space from the situation. And understood yesterday, it took a day, probably a day and a half for me to figure out that, I think what had happened is it really had triggered some core childhood memories, like we went back to the nesting doll of the little one to say, hey, Jamie, you messed up and it's all your fault and you should do something different. And so,
and just to be clear, even if nobody's actually saying that, that's what people feel like. Because I can kind of relate to this a little bit. I know there's some things that I was raised with that even in my adult age now, something will happen and it will immediately take me back to those moments as a child. And it's like, I have to start going through my mind really quick to say, okay, did I do something wrong or did I miss something or why am I back here? So again, I can kind of relate to what you're saying because those pillars that we built or the foundations that we built the rest of our adult life on are on the backbone of those childhood events. So, and I know you and I have been friends even in our childhood, so I kind of understand what you're going through when you say those flashbacks almost come back to you. So,
well, and it was so insidious that I didn't even realize, I didn't recognize at the time. So I'm super grateful that I was able to that I had the wherewithal to just step back, and think about that and really reflect on that. Because I think, of course, this has then brought forth a whole flood of things like, oh, so maybe every time I feel like I'm not doing something right, or I mess something up, or it's all my fault, maybe all of that has been this little voice inside my head from, I don't know, 7 years old or something. You know what I mean? So I guess that just kind of brings me around to, what I was hoping we could talk about today, which is when it's okay to walk away. What kind of situations happen that bring
Oh,
us to a space where we need to step back and take a minute to either really examine our own perspective or maybe see if we can find perspective from the opposite side of the table when we're coming into these conversations that might not be super easy.
yeah, no, that's really interesting because that's, as I'm hearing you talk about stuff, I'm relating to you. There's been work related incidents that's happened to me where, you've almost had to say, I cannot stay engaged in this conversation. I've had personal conversations where, if I continue in down this course and this type of conversation with this individual, it's going to damage either temporarily or even permanently damage this relationship. And so that is, that's a balancing act between when is it enough where you say, okay, let's put a pause here. Let's walk away from the situation at hand and let some things cool off a little bit, maybe, calm down, but then regroup with this individual at a later time when some time has passed and maybe things aren't as personal or as fresh as they are right now. I've fallen guilty of that, a victim of that as well, where there's a problem right now. I want to address it, even though it might be too either emotionally raw or too fresh in the person's mind. But for me, it's more important that we get this resolved than it is for me to understand where everybody's at in that conversation, if that makes sense.
It does. Well, and truthfully, that used to be my modus operandi was we are going to talk this to death until we figure it out, right? I would just beat that horse until it was not ever going to run again. So,
Till it's not a horse anymore. It's just,
exactly.
well, and not to cut you off, but even to go back to my childhood, that's something that I witnessed my parents do. That's something that they, kind of instilled in me is if you have a problem with someone, resolve it. Well, that perspective is always about me, though. Like, I need to resolve this for me. And I never really took into account the person, if they were ready to resolve it. It was all about, I need to get this resolved so I feel better, and this person just has to suffer through it. Hearing your example and even talking now, I've never really even thought about the other person in that conversation, really, to say, are they even ready? And, to go really super deep, should I walk away not for my benefit, but for them? Because if maybe they're not in the right state of mind where they can recognize that we need a break and they want to keep going, but I do, maybe it's me pulling away or stepping away. That's a whole different perspective that, quite frankly, never really thought about until us talking about it right now.
Yeah. Well, and I always will say I'm thankful. I'm thankful for my parenting journey because I feel like I had to learn some of this through parenting, and really understanding each of my kids have a different, I guess, conflict style, how they meet and interact with tense situations or difficult conversations. And so I think that's probably where I started learning this in a way that wasn't like for specifics, like specific situations. Does that make sense? Like I can always be professional at work and I can always take a break and say, you know what, this is probably not super productive. Let's come back to this conversation later, right? That's an easy space for that to happen. But when you're in those relationships where you're almost forced into these relationships, right? Like these are long-term, lifelong relationships, parent, child, spouse, those kind of things. It's a different skill set and it's also a different comfort level. So with my kids, I want to resolve it. I want to talk it out. I want to understand every X, Y, and Z, what steps took place for you to get to this space, whatever. And I had to learn real fast that it was okay for me to take a minute and say, I need a moment to think about that, or it looks like you need to go for a walk or take a minute. And that has been, I think that's been a huge growth set for me as my kids grew into teenagers, to be able to learn that and be more perceptive, I guess, about where another person's coming from.
Well, and something else that you just said about, work, and again, I can be professional at work too, but where I find that I struggle in this area as I'm thinking through this is when it becomes very personal. And work can be very personal for me because a lot of my identity is wrapped up in what I do for a living. Right, wrong, or indifferent. Lord willing, I'm going to be working for another 20 plus years. So I've been working a long time. So, we're talking a span of 40, 45 years by the time we're done. That's a long time of our life doing, something in the same field, or, as we learn a craft, and then we use that and we hone in on its specialities and we focus on certain areas, like that becomes very personal. So I have to guard myself even at work, because when I present something that I've been working on, and even if it's perceived as poo-pooed on or not good enough, or, oh, that's a great start, Mahlon, and I'm like, start? I've been working on this for like 2 weeks. It's very easy for me to all of a sudden make that personal and almost like an attack on me as an individual rather than the work that I'm producing. So I just wanted to hit on that. For me, I could see where I would fall in this trap in my work life, my professional life, in seasoned relationships that I've had for many, many, many years, or even acquaintances that I'm just meeting. Like anytime I would feel like it would become almost a personal, I don't want to say attack, but when I would register that on, hey, that's about me as a person, that I think I would have a hard time knowing when to walk away. And the irony of that is that's probably exactly when I need to walk away, right? Is when it's not all about me, and that's another part of what I'm learning in life. But a lot of conversations I've had with people in the past, I have made it about me when it has had nothing to do with it.
That is, I tell you, and I feel like we might have talked about this before, maybe not, but that phrase, I should probably have it tattooed on my forehead backwards or something. So every day when I look in the mirror, it's not all about you. I'm really not that self-centered. It's not like I wake up thinking.
Right. I don't wake up in my town and be like, hey, it's named after Mahlon and the birds are chirping for me and all that. No, I get that. But, for me, it's just about, that's how I start relating to people and situations, is through my lens. I always go to, how does this impact me? How would I benefit, or how would I suffer because of it? And I need to learn that to pick my head up and look beyond myself and start looking at, other people in relationships before looking at my own. I mean, I don't think it's self-centered. I don't think it's egotistic to say relationships impact yourself, right? Well, they do impact you. I guess what I'm trying to say for me is, I want to start at the space of, how does my actions, or how does this conversation that I'm part of, how is that coming or impacting the person that I'm having the conversation with? Because maybe that unlocks something that I can then understand, oh, this is not a personal attack, right? Like when we're talking about work, maybe the person that's coming to me because they're under a critical deadline that I'm not under, but they're responding out of, panic or frustration themselves. And so that's spilling over onto me. And now, instead of me just taking that and I internalize it and say, well, you're personally attacking me, it might be they're just trying to communicate the best way they know how with a very stressful situation that they're under. And if I came into a conversation knowing that, I think I would be better to navigate those waters and maybe help that person calm down a little bit, help myself not be so offended. I don't know, just something I'm thinking about.
Well, and truthfully, just to go back to my little anecdote to start, it's not all about me. So my reaction to what I perceived as what was happening made me feel some sort of way, right? But I know for a fact that was not the message that was being sent to me. That's the message I got because of where I was in that space and that time. And so, the message wasn't, hey, Jamie, you suck today and you should have done X, Y, and Z. There was no message for me at all. But here I was picking up a message that wasn't even there, right? So I think that's one example of when it's okay to walk away, when I'm not in the space to be open to another perspective, or when I'm in a space where I am not doing well. That's probably a pretty important time to walk away. the hard part is recognizing it. I think that is a skill that has grown for me over time. I don't know about you, but recognizing those times where I can't be having this conversation right now. I'm not in a space where I can do this effectively or in a healthy way.
You're exactly right. Like there's times when I'm not in the right state of mind. I shouldn't be having this conversation. And this is going to sound really weird, but I've almost been looking for the other person to give me giving me permission to be able to say, I can't talk right now, or I need to take a break, or let me digest this. And I've learned throughout my life is that nobody's going to give you permission to do that. Nobody's going to say, hey, Jamie, let's talk about this, and say, you know what, if you need a few minutes, go ahead and take this and digest it. They're going to probably want to, address it right here, right now. But it's my obligation, if I'm not ready to do that, or I'm not in a, ready to do it in a productive manner, that I need to be able to feel comfortable enough, first of all, in my surroundings, with the person I'm having the conversation with, and myself, to say, I can't do this right now. I need to take a minute to step away and gather myself. And I'll tell you right now, one of the hardest things for me is even being vulnerable enough with the other person for them to see I need a minute, because I used to perceive that as a sign of weakness, right? In my professional career, if I wasn't able to have the conversation right here, right now, I was not prepared enough. In my personal life, if I was going to say, hey, I need to walk away, that's because now I'm making the other person feel like I don't value their opinion or their time, or I'm trying to just kind of move this problem to the side because it's annoying me. So these are the things that I was struggling with. And so I've had to start overcoming those a little bit. And I'm still not the strongest at this, but I'm learning that I actually get a better response from people if I do need to take the time, that I take it. And so that's helping me with that part. But for the longest time, if I wasn't able to have the conversation right now, and again, going back to the building blocks of our childhood, I think this is kind of where they stemmed from, then that was a sign of weakness, or that was me being exposed or too transparent with the person I'm having a conversation with. And I didn't want that to happen. So, there was a lot of conversations that I faked it till I made it. And there was a lot of relationships that probably burned because, again, it was more important for me to fix the problem or finish the conversation than it was to salvage the relationship as a whole. And I think there needs to be a good balance between those.
No, that's a hard balance to find, I think. And of course, the constant growing interpersonal skill set that we all get to grow as we mature into full functioning adults. Not sure when this happens, but hopefully it's soon, right? But it's part of that skill set, is to be able to recognize, not just for another person, okay, maybe they need a minute, but also to recognize it in ourselves. And I'm not sure I can even pinpoint a time when that happened. I think, I guess needless to say, I'm pretty proud of myself for being able to do that the other day, but it's a tough piece. What about with someone close to you? Have you been in that spot where either someone you're really close to has seen that space for you and said, "Hey, let's just call a time out here and take a break," or have you done that for someone close to you?
Well, of course, being married, that's probably one of the closest relationships you can have on this planet,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so thinking through, I'm sure, grace covers a lot of sins. And so, I'm very thankful that my wife has probably given me more grace than I deserved, or probably should have asked for. So I would say in that regard, yes, I can see where now's not the right time to continue this conversation. It's not going to be productive, or, I need a minute to cool off, or what have you. So I'd say that's probably the closest example that I would have as having that relationship in my life that, does that for me, then also, I allow it to happen for them. And I think that goes back to my earlier statement. I'm a lot more vulnerable with my wife than I am with probably anybody else. And so I almost feel it's almost more allowed to do it in that relationship than any others because it is the closest to me, but yet it's also the safest. And I know we've talked about that in past podcasts too, is the environment and how safe you feel. So I think that has a lot to do with it if I'm doing some self-reflection right now, because I also know my wife, hopefully knock on wood, isn't going anywhere. So that relationship's not going to end because we disagree or we fight, because that happens, in every marriage. But I don't know if I could say the same thing in a work relationship or a friendship, either being brand new or maybe even a couple of years old. I don't think you have that safety that you would in that, a marriage type relationship.
Well, and definitely don't have the option to walk away for extended periods of time. Thinking about all of the different types of relationships we have, what are some situations that you have or that you feel like it's okay to stop and say, you know what, I need to walk away. Like, I just need to step back from this, either for short or long term.
Now you're asking what I have done or what I should be doing, because I'm starting to understand, Jamie, even in this conversation, that there are situations where I probably should have walked away and I didn't.
Oh, well, maybe a little bit of both. Let's learn from each other here, friend.
Yeah, so obviously when I was younger, and again, it's all about Mahlon, right? Just ask me, I'll tell you, it's all about me. Every situation was through my lens and how it was impacting me and how, people were coming in and out of my life. So right now I'm in my mind, I'm thinking through high school, early college. There was conversations where somebody would say something across the room in high school and you just knew they were talking about you, right? Like, I just knew that they were whispering about me. Why? Because what else would other people be talking about right now if it wasn't for me? I mean, I'm in the room. So, there's probably times when things like that, and again, it comes with age, comes with wisdom, things I'm trying to pass down to my kids too, right? Is, they're probably not talking about you. I've learned that when there have been people that come and they bring negativity or they have a conflict they want to air out, a lot of times I'm finding it's not about anything that I've done. It's about the things they're going through in their life and the struggle. And so when they're lashing out, it's because they're hurting in some way or somebody has disappointed them in some way. It has nothing to do with me, but I might just be the lucky recipient of that, of those feelings or that situation that happened to them. But again, in the time of having the conversation, I wasn't thinking in those terms. I wasn't looking for what is the root cause. And I think of all the things that we've been talking about, that's been the phrase that's been jumping in my head is root cause. I wasn't looking to see, where the pain was coming from. I just was getting pain inflicted upon me. So now it's my turn to inflict that much pain, if not more, back on that person because, again, they are either offending me or accusing me or telling me my work's not good enough, whatever. I think I'm off topic here a little bit, but root cause for me, Jamie, is something that I think over the years I'm starting to learn to look for and maybe seek out, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, see, there I did it again, guys.
Put a nickel in the for sure jar.
For sure. We are gonna have money for new podcasting equipment with the for sure jar before we know it. So I think what I love about podcasting with you, Mahlon, is it really is an opportunity to put a mirror up in front of our own face, right? So we're talking about these kind of things and it makes me think back on all kinds of different things. I had a good friend in high school who probably wasn't necessarily a really great friend. You have one of those friends, if you ever had one of those friends, fun to hang out with, you're super close, but probably not the most healthy relationship you've ever had,
Oh, yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
You probably know who I'm talking about because I'm pretty sure we've been friends that long. So I can't even tell you what happened. But literally, probably 5 years ago, they were in town, came and visited, took the kids, we went and had ice cream, had a nice conversation and whatever. And then we talked again, like maybe 2 or 3 months later, because it's kind of the pattern that our friendship had. I don't know. I was going through the hardest thing in my life. I had just recently moved out on my own with my kids, and was learning about being a single mom and being a divorcee and all of these things. And when they called me, it was all about them. And I was like, I mean, I had just been through probably the worst 6 months of my life. And when I talked with them, it was just like, oh, yeah, that's terrible. So I was at Hy-Vee the other day, and it's just like, I need you to be with me, and I need you to hear me, and I need somebody to reflect this back and say, no, you're not a bad person, and it's going to be okay, Jamie, because it was all about me at the time, I guess. That sounds really bad too, but um,
Well, I think we can all agree that there are situations in our life when it's okay and it should be about you. And I think when you're transitioning from being, a couple parenting children to being a single parent, that's probably one of the times where you do need to have it be about you for just even a
just
hot
a minute. Like
Just-
I really just needed a minute.
right?
Well, and I was kind of hoping for some perspective, like I was hoping to reflect something from him about like what that experience was like for them. Like when they were young, what did that look like? What did that feel like? To get some insight as to what my kids might be experiencing. And it just didn't happen like that. And we talked a couple more times pretty sporadically. And then like one day I just noticed I was no longer friends with him on Facebook. Like I just got blocked. I did a search, couldn't
Ew.
find them, like nothing. And so something about those conversations over a few month period made them walk away. So, it just, things like that make me wonder, like, of course, at the time it was like, oh gosh, what did I say? What did I do? It had nothing to do with them. It had everything to do with me. For all I know, they completely shut down their Facebook page, right? Like, maybe they don't even have one
Right.
anymore. But I thought it was all about me. Like, I got blocked. What did I do to get blocked?
Yeah. Well, and I know this isn't a social media podcast, but can we talk about that for a minute on just the sheer act of unfollowing or friending or blocking somebody on these apps? I mean, what was it, 10 years ago, we didn't even have Facebook, and now it's like controlling or dictating. We're in relationships not because I've talked to the person and said we're in a relationship and they had agreed and we've actually went on a date. It's actually when I change the status of my Facebook account, then that's when it becomes a relationship. I mean, what kind of a culture are we living in? But I digress.
Well, I'm just glad they got rid of the poke feature on Facebook. Can we just be thankful for that for a second?
Well, and your example that you shared, Jamie, brings me to another question, which is we have these relationships and these people in our lives, and when is it a good time to walk away? And I don't want this to be about the podcast because I think this would be a great topic in and of its own. But when is it a good time to sever that relationship, right? If we can recognize that we're not getting out of the relationship what we're putting into it, or if all we're getting out of the relationship is negativity, or in your situation, they couldn't even take a minute to talk about your problems or what you were going through, then maybe that's a relationship we need to weed out of our lives. I heard somewhere along the line, I don't think this came from me, so I'm not claiming it, but I can't remember where it came from, is that life is like a garden and you have, flowers and all these beautiful things that are in there, but you also have weeds and dandelions and even some plants that look very pretty to look at, but if you don't keep them in check, they will overgrow and kill everything else in your garden. And the older I get and the more relationships I go through, and some begin and some end, the more accurate I think that analogy is that we have to be, tending to our life and pulling out these weeds or these plants that will strangle what we want to have growing in our garden. And I'm probably butchering that analogy, and the people that are listening probably have heard that too. So again, it's not mine, but I can't remember where I got it from. But I think it's very fitting.
Well, and in the same thread, part of me really feels like there's a cycle to relationships most of the time. You know what I mean? Like
Yep.
There's a time where there's a great need for one or the other or both. Several years ago, this was a long time ago actually. I had a group of ladies that I was really close to, and a couple of things happened. We were all together, like we had all come together over a shared activity, and then we just kind of met up for coffee once a week. And, I think for the first time in my adult life, it felt like a really healthy mix of support and a place that I could offer support, right? So that mutual give take space. It was just a safe space for all of us. And some things had happened in the organization that we were part of, and it started causing like a rift. And it wasn't like an ugly rift. It's not like anybody was mad at each other or anything like that. But you could definitely see these two sides forming. There's a couple people that were just I don't want to say making some waves, but just had some strong opinions about some things that were happening in the larger group, and then some of us that were like, but I don't feel like I can say anything or whatever. But it really started this little divide, and I was super sad about it for a long time because it was such a good nurturing place for friendship and for relationship. It got to a point where we really just stopped getting together, and then I lost contact with a couple of people, and I was really, really sad about it. And one of the women in the group really just kind of pulled me aside and was like, Jamie, here's the thing. We have people come in and out for a reason. Either they need us or we need them, or, they serve some purpose. And sometimes that's a short-term purpose, and sometimes it's a long-term purpose. And, maybe it's okay to let that go and just value what was brought to the table when it was brought to the table, and know that the purpose has been served. It gave me a whole different perspective about losing touch with someone, or, you know what I mean?
I do, but here's where my mind went. Again, I'm still an infant in some of these things. It's that when it's been a really good experience, you almost want to stomp your feet and be like, no, I want more. Like, you can't take that away from me. I want more. And in my mind, I see myself kind of stomping my foot, crossing my arms, and being like, not fair, not fair. But, I'll say something my mom always said is, whoever told you life was fair? I kind of repeat that to myself. But while you were talking, it did make me ask, or come up with another question I want to ask you, which is, have you ever been in a situation where you tried to end a relationship because you knew it was toxic and the other person just would not go away? So it's like you're almost being held hostage by this. I mean, I think I can count on maybe one hand something similar that happened to me, but for the most part it hasn't. But I thought, what an interesting concept. I wonder if that happens to any of our listeners, or even if you've experienced that, because I think I can loosely make a connection, but I'm pretty straightforward and pretty blunt with my words. So most of the time, if a relationship needs to end and I end it, the other person gets it. But it made me stop and think about that for a second. Have you ever encountered something
I'm
like that?
loving the question because I'm imagining all kinds of really fun scenarios, like movie scene scenarios. I don't know that I've experienced anything super blatant like that, but you think about things like in-laws, or you know what I mean? Like those people that you can't, like, they're in your life and you can't make it different. Like they're just in your life and they're going to be in your life. But no,
Yeah.
I think we could write a movie about the scenarios that popped in my head when you talk about that.
Right. And when you open the door to like families, in-laws, I mean, things that, the whole adage, you can pick your friends, but you can't pick your family. I think that's probably where this kind of comes into play a lot more, is that you put up a wall, or you say, hey, I need to remove myself, but then you see them at every family function, or you spend Christmas with them, and it's like, how do you do that? I think that would be a good podcast in and of itself. But just as you were talking in your last, I thought to myself, I wonder if you've ever experienced where you've recognized there's a relationship, you've tried to take steps to sever the relationship, and the other person just isn't getting it. So it's like,
I think what I'm loving so much is that I think, so my partner works with a large group of people, and I think if I were to ask him this question, he would be like, yes, this happens all the time for me at work. Like people people treat him like he's their bestie, and the feeling may not be mutual is all I'm getting at. I guess the other thing I was thinking we should probably think about, though, those moments when you walk away. So you walk away from a conversation, you've decided it's okay, probably healthy, and maybe even a better scenario to walk away. What does that then look like when you come back together? how do you repair that, or how do you go back to where you started when you need to walk away?
Yeah, I think that's really good that we're starting to touch on this, because in my mind, and I'll just rip the Band-Aid off for me so you can be the counterpart, is if I'm going to go to the steps of severing a relationship, is it one that I ever wanted to come back? Initially, I would say probably not, because to sever a relationship, that would mean that there's really no hope of salvaging it, and there's no benefit, maybe because I've been trying for a while, or it's causing me negative effects in my life and it needs to go. But that's very interesting. So do you have an example or something that you were thinking when you asked that question? Because to me, and I like to see the world in black and white. If I'm going to sever a relationship, there's obviously a reason, and I can't come back from being repaired. So in your question, Jamie, what are you thinking about maybe a relationship that has happened in, just to give me some more context?
Well, and I don't even know that I can say like relationships. I think those might come around to a space where you can like repair whatever had happened. I'm thinking more like those heated discussions, those heated conversations where you're like, I am not in a space to have this conversation, but I need a break, but we know we have to find resolution in that. How do you make steps to, I guess, come back together and repair that rupture in relationship?
Yeah, so now I'm starting to understand what you're asking. I was thinking of severing the relationship. I was still in my garden watering some of my flowers. But what I'm hearing you say now is when there's a disagreement or heated conversation, and maybe it's changed the relationship or maybe even damaged it, but it's not severed. How do you start repairing that? For me, it starts with humbling myself. There's been many times that I've had to apologize for something that I've said, or apologize how it made somebody feel when I really don't think it warranted an apology, but I'm providing one not for my benefit, but for them. And I do it genuinely, right? Because I don't want to just patronize the person and say, oh, I'm just going to say I'm sorry and move on. It's really about how do I humble myself and really genuinely believe what I'm about to ask for, which is forgiveness, in order to start mending that relationship. Or you know what? And sometimes you can't mend it back the way it was, but maybe you get it to a place where it's still beneficial for both parties, but it's always going to be changed from that point on.
I think the first time I had to do this in a professional setting was really hard. Like to come back and be like, okay, so that didn't go the way I wanted it to. And I want to apologize for that. It was so hard. It was so hard to know how to, I guess, start that conversation. But practice makes perfect for me. Okay, not that I'm perfect. No, it's still hard and I still mess it up sometimes, but it's easier for me to come back to that and admit where I could have made things better or improved, and then to ask in a caring way, like, are you okay? Can we have this conversation now? Like, can we pick it up where we left off or start again? And it's not as bad as I thought it was going to be. And actually, shockingly, has been received well when I've needed to do that, to come back and be like, hey, that was not cool of me. I'm going to try and be cooler this time.
Well, and I think for me also, is I have to be willing to do that for other people. So if I'm the one that's offended or been hurt and somebody comes to me, I have to humble myself to the point of saying, I accept that, right? I accept your apology and I'm able to move past it. Because I think part of that healing comes from, if people can see that you're willing to do that for them, then I think they're going to be a little bit more willing to do that for you. So I've had to learn myself to be able to honestly give that forgiveness to people that have wronged me and asked me for that forgiveness. Younger self, there was like, yeah, I forgive you, but then I'll never forget, right? And then every single time I almost hold it against them. And so ultimately, as you can imagine, that kills the overall relationship. So I've had to learn, if I'm going to give that forgiveness, I give it with an open hand. And I think by doing that and showing people, then when I come around and ask them, hey, I need some forgiveness right now, and they're more willing to give it to me too, because they know that I'm not using it as a scoreboard or a weapon to bring back later to remind them just how they wronged me.
I don't know about you, but this has been super helpful for me. Like, I feel like just kind of chatting through these things really helps me be more mindful of this stuff, and, to really think about not just my reactions and how that's perceived, but also to watch for those reactions from another person. And I love the idea of grace. Oh, thank goodness for the concept of grace, right? To be able to give someone the space and grace to have their feelings, because God knows a lot of people have given me the space and grace to have mine, right?
I don't know if we have time for just one more question, but I was curious if you had an opinion on, have you ever encountered somebody that was maybe being a little oversensitive to something you said, and
Yeah.
no matter how you try to patch it up, it just doesn't seem to work? Because I've encountered that a lot in my life. Is so I'll say some things or do something, and the other person, in my opinion, just seems to be so overly sensitive about what was said that they can't get around it and they can't seem to overcome it. So I just didn't know if you had any experiences or insights from your life that could speak to that a little bit.
I have both been in a conversation with someone who I perceived as being overly sensitive, and also been the overly sensitive. So yeah, I have plenty of experience on this one, my friend. But no, I think, again though, when I've been overly sensitive about stuff, it's typically because of what's happened to me, right? Like where I've been that day, how much sleep I got, whether I'm hungry. You know what I mean? Like, it has so much
Yeah.
to do with where I'm coming from. And because I know that about myself, that when I am overly sensitive, it's typically all of the things that are surrounded me. It's not usually that conversation that makes me sensitive, but it's all the things that are happening around that conversation. So I try to give that space to other people to just know that, like, okay, especially if it's not someone who's typically like super sensitive.
Right.
If it's not someone who's typically, like, if I were having a conversation with you who is not overly sensitive, and you were being really sensitive, I'd really have to stop and look at my approach for you, right? Like, okay, Jamie, maybe we came off a little harder than we thought. Because it would have to be pretty harsh, I think.
No, and I hear what you're saying. I just think I struggle sometimes because there's some people that no matter what you say or do, it's never going to be right. And I think that goes back to our earlier conversation that maybe that's one of those relationships that we learn to kind of prune out of our life then. But man, I tell you, it's difficult because you try to do everything that we talked about, humbling yourself and asking for forgiveness and giving grace. And it just doesn't seem to work with some of those, highly sensitive individuals. So I was just going to ask that one last
Well, and I
question.
think my default is to remember that I can't change anything but myself, right? So my effort in those situations, and I have been in those situations. Okay, let's be real. I had a teenage daughter. Okay. So I was in that situation for like 2 years of my life. And God bless her. We just did not communicate very well. And I don't think it's because she was overly sensitive. And if she's listening, I love you so much. I'm so glad we grew together. And our relationship's good now. But my default in that situation, after I could get over myself, was to look at adjusting the way that I approach the situation. And I don't think it's because I was doing anything innately wrong. I think it's because sometimes it's just not a match, right? Like, sometimes that interpersonal style from each person is just not a match. And so in order to get through that, I just worked really hard to try and find that connection, that sweet spot for connection, to say, this is what works well. If I approach in this way, it doesn't offend and it doesn't hurt. But that's kind of my default anyway, like, to try and what can I adjust to make the situation better,
Well, you said it earlier, although I'm going to restate it maybe just a little bit different. When you talked about, relationships early on, sometimes we just grow apart. So sometimes people, I think you said relationships come in for a season or they cycle through. Well, I think also another way to looking at that, or at least the way I look at it, is people change. And sometimes you change at different rates, and sometimes you change, you grow apart or you grow together. I've heard those terms before. But really, there's times where you are friends with somebody, and for whatever reason, circumstances, age, life experiences, you start going down different paths because of those different experiences changing the way you look at the world and changing how you respond to people. And I always thought when I was growing up and I was going through elementary school, middle school, hit puberty, I was in high school, and that once I hit college, I'm like, oh, I'm done. Like, this is who I'm going to be for the rest of my life. Thank goodness. Yeah, as Jamie laughs. Thank goodness that that's not the case, because I'm a lot more mature, and I think I'm a lot more seasoned and have a lot more everything really at this age than I did when I was even in my younger days of college. But I think that season of change in my mind was a lot smaller than it is, and I'm understanding that that's a lifetime. Like, we change throughout our lives, and so the friendships that we had when I was in high school versus what I have in early college to even what I have now, different.
Well, and actually, going back to that example that I gave about the friend that just like deleted me on Facebook, I kind of wonder if that's part of it. We were in very, very different stages in life. Not only had I been married and had kids and was now divorced and single parenting, I feel like when just the act of parenting my kids and, foster parenting before my kids, I learned so much about, like, they had to be put first, right? I mean, you start learning that your kids come first. And so I shouldn't be super surprised when another person's life is still all about them, because there isn't a need to make it about someone else. You know what I'm saying? Like, I kind of feel like that's probably what happened there. Like, we were just in very different spaces and stages of life. And we needed very different things out of friendship at that point. It's okay.
Well, and
It's
we
for
haven't
the
even
best.
touched on the relationships that start up because of being codependent on one another, which is never a healthy way to have a relationship. But I thought about, and this came to mind when I was talking about being early college. I know when I went to college and I was basically by myself and I didn't really know anybody, and I had to start those friendships over. I gravitated to those people that kind of had the same feelings that I did. Well, those relationships didn't last because we built that relationship off the sense of we felt alone. Well, as soon as we weren't alone anymore, what else did we really have with one another, right? That common thread was broken because neither one of us really felt like we were in that same state any longer. And with nothing else to really hold us together, the relationships just broke apart and fizzled out. But, we haven't even talked or touched about those types of relationships that come together. We can be nice and say, oh, well, those were part of those, those cyclical relationships at a small need that we had, and we brought them in and then they left. But I think this goes one step beyond that, and is we have these relationships because we have a situation that's going on in our life and somebody else can relate because they may be going through something similar. But as soon as that situation or criteria ends or changes, the relationship does too.
No, that's a really good point. And it's a good thing that we have the next 25 years to produce podcasts, because we can definitely
I'm
hit
sure
on
people
that
are
at
like,
some
oh,
point.
great. No, I appreciate having this conversation because it is. I love every time we get together and talk, because I have something I can go back and kind of reflect on. And in this particular case, I have something that I'm going to take back and practice, which is stop thinking that it's about me and start trying to find the root cause of what's going on in these relationships that might cause someone to have those conversations. And it's okay to walk away from that conversation to figure that out. I don't need to do that in real time as the conversation's happening. I can also take a breath and say, let's pause and come back together when maybe it's not quite as emotionally charged, or I'm not feeling so personally attacked or offended, and I can think clearly. So I think that's a good lesson to learn. At least that's the one I've learned from this conversation.
No, that's really good. I love the questions you brought too, because it really helped me think about, like, think about those spaces and those times when things like when I was misperceived as I was trying to convey a message or things like that. That probably happens more often than I care to admit. I really, I don't know. As much as I try to make sure that I am focused on doing my best to shift and adjust to be the best communicator I can, at times I still fall a little short and come across way harsher or something. I don't know what the word is, but you get what I'm saying.
I do, because I get also labeled a lot because I don't have the the strongest or the most elaborate emotional spectrum, but I do have an emotional spectrum. It just doesn't cover a lot of areas, and so there's a lot of times I get pigeonholed into being uncaring or unfeeling or emotionally dead inside, and it's not the case. It's just
No, that's so not the case.
my spectrum. Yeah, my spectrum just isn't as sprawled out as some people. And I think that's a really good, our listeners, they've heard us now for a couple episodes, and I just want to let everyone know that for the last couple episodes, Jamie and I have pretty much agreed on most of this, and some of this stuff we're trying to get to the heart of some of these conversations around relationships and perspectives. But I'm sure
we're building a foundation.
Yes, because there are some things that we'll be talking about in the upcoming podcast where we don't see eye to eye on some things. And the reason and I'm going to speak for myself, the reason I like these foundational podcasts is it shows really how we normally communicate, how we kind of give each other mutual respect. But there's some topics I think we're going to get into later on that we probably, well, I know we do not see eye to eye. And I appreciate these podcasts, as you said, the foundation. So then people just understand we're not at each other's throat, but we have rich history that gets us to be able to have those honest conversations. And that's what I'm really looking for in the upcoming podcast episodes, is continuing doing what we're doing, but also adding those opportunities to touch on some of these, hard to discuss topics that, as we talked about earlier, polarizing society. It'd be great for us to kind of unpack those on our show as well.
Well, and
what a better way to display it than on the round table.
Right. Well, and I guess I do feel the need to give a small disclaimer to say, please don't judge us if we mess up on these skills that we are still learning, because we are works in progress. And
no, and I totally agree with you. I don't ever want to be labeled as I've arrived, I'm perfection. I think I've said this on the show, I do not have a license in psychiatry or any kind of social work at all. But what I do have are skinned knees and bruised elbows for all the times in life that I fell and, made a misstep and had an accident. And I don't want to be on this podcast being perceived or even acting like I have all the answers, because I don't. I'm just trying to share my life and my experiences and my perspective. And I'm eagerly awaiting your perspective, Jamie, and how you've walked through life and your experiences. And I cannot wait till we can hear some of those from the listeners as well.
Well, and on that topic, we have a goal. We have a goal in order to allow ourselves to make the purchase to bring guests on to the show here at Roundtable Mindset. So you can help us reach our goal by commenting, and sharing wherever you listen to podcasts, so that we can get our new equipment that will allow us to bring up guests and other perspectives to the table.
Yes,
so
shameless plug,
solid.
but it's needed. So unless you just want to hear Jamie and I talk and on these mics, which again, I have a really good time with you, Jamie, but I also am very interested and excited to hear from our listeners. And also, I think we're starting to get guests lined up that we like to bring on. And with our current equipment, that's a limitation right now that we have to overcome. So,
because we're just starting out, folks. You are here with us in our origin story of the Roundtable Mindset.
You want to talk about witnessing growth? You're in it. Because right
on
now,
for the ride.
Yeah, we probably are going to say, like you said, JB, some mistakes and mishaps, and we'll be out there for everyone. Because that's one of the things that I am trying to produce as well, is I want to be authentic. I don't want to give a persona of who I am. I want everyone to get to know who I am as a person, struggles and successes. So I am almost positive I am going to say some things that will probably offend some people. Probably I've already offended you, Jamie, and I'm probably going to get offended. But I think it's important to show that and kind of work through that with everyone, because I think that's at the heart of why we're looking for and we're eager to see other people's perspective, is to be able to work through things like that.
You know, I have to tell you, ding, 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 you did not offend me today. So you should get the podcast award for the day. The RTM participation award goes to Mahlon for not offending Jamie today.
Now you've offended me. So
that's why you get the award and I don't. So
yes. You are emotionally raw and chafing me. Okay, so with that, thank you again, Jamie, for another wonderful conversation, and thank you to all of our listeners for hanging in there with us and continuing to grow with us, and I look forward to our future conversations.
Yes, we'll see you next time on Roundtable Mindset. Hasta.
Bye all.
This podcast was recorded and edited by Jamie and Mahlon, with music by Famous Cats. If you have a topic you'd like us to discuss, please email us at roundtablemindset@gmail.com. And never miss a new episode by making sure you like and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
If you enjoyed your time with us today, do us a favor and invite a friend. Thanks for listening. Please join us next time at the round table, and remember, your opinion and perspective matter, and we might not see eye to eye, but that's okay.